region, a very strong region in itself. Going to be a great game. We can start by taking a look at the players. You can see Leonardo's kind of already got a lot of great achievements to his name. 2019 European International Championship top 64. He's got a 2019 World's top 64 finish as well, and then more recently in 2020 Malmo Regionals top 8 finish. So a very accomplished player all in all.
Yeah, and Alberto Daza's side, there's lots of accomplishments here as well. Stemming back to 2015, was able to take a top 32 regional finish. As well in 2016, was able to get top 64 at the Mexico Nationals and also top 16 at the Mexico Regionals. So some really good finishes in that year. And then in 2017, was able to also continue this top 16 record at Nulla Regionals. So fantastic accomplishments here with those top finishes. But Lee, I see some very interesting things in the teams here.
Yeah, I imagine you're referring to the Wheezing and the Regigigas here, something that we haven't actually seen ourselves so far in this tournament. So going to be very exciting. And you know, we talked a little bit before going into this match that it's so disruptive because it just nullifies all of these abilities on everything on Leonardo's side of the field. The reliance on the sun here from the Groudon, well, that's not coming into effect. The chlorophyll ability doesn't work. The solar power doesn't work on the Charizard. You've got no Intimidator with Incineroar. The inner focus isn't there on the Umbreon, and the list goes on. It makes it very difficult for Leonardo to kind of take advantage of a lot of these abilities that the team relies to function on.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of maneuverability going around here on the field for Leonardo, because if that Wheezing comes into play, it's going to be so disruptive, sort of ruining the weather and then ruining the boost that those weather partner Pokemon get, such as the chlorophyll and the solar power. So that will kind of have to factor into a lot of the damage calculations as well, and the speed calculations for Leonardo that he maybe will be used to when kind of prepping for these Players' Cup matches. And on the other side, if you're Alberto, you need to make sure that you are protecting these Pokemon wisely so that they're able to utilize that neutralizing gas ability so well, so that it can cause the disruption that it needs to.
Yeah, and one option that Leonardo can kind of rely on in this match, I think, is the Umbreon, because we've seen him utilize it quite effectively in previous games where he can disrupt with the Yawn. And if you can manage to get a Yawn onto something like the Regigigas, it's going to be difficult because Wheezing generally carries something like Taunt, and with the Max Strike lowering speeds and things like that, it does create complications. But you could maybe utilize something like Regieleki in that situation to lower the speed on the opposing side of the field before the Max Strike potentially takes off. This is just a scenario, but if you can utilize the Umbreon, it's so disruptive, and it can really make things a bit more difficult for Alberto to kind of take advantage of that kind of combination.
Well, you've mentioned Regieleki, and I'm very, very excited to see that Pokemon, so fingers crossed we maybe get to see it come up in this match. So let's jump into Game 1 in our first winners semi-final here and see exactly how things are going to play out. On Alberto's side, we are going to see that combination there of the Regigigas and the Wheezing, and then on Leonardo's side, a classic Suncore combination of the Venusaur and the Groudon, but it's not going to be able to do exactly what it wants to do. There's going to be no sun on the field and no chlorophyll to activate.
No, it's very difficult here because you kind of rely on the Venusaur being, having that chlorophyll to be able to maybe threaten with sleep powders or just a big Gigantamax attack. And the Groudon here is susceptible to potentially Will-O-Wisps as well, that the Weezing is known to kind of carry. So you've got to be very careful here. It's a pretty easy turn for Alberto to just go click that Dynamax button with the Regigigas, go for that Max Strike, and then you've got a flurry of options here with the Weezing to maybe burn the Groudon or just go after the Venusaur with a Taunt.
Yeah, and Regigigas has a nice kind of pool of moves that it can go for in terms of Max Strikes. So the Max Hailstorm as well, that can apply a lot of pressure to both of the opposing Pokemon on Leonardo's side. It's just going to be a protector from the Wheezing, often is the main target, so that you can stop this nice synergy between the Regigigas and the Wheezing straight away. And you can see the Max Hailstorm going straight down into that Venusaur with a critical hit as well. Going to take it down to its Focus Sash, but with the weather that's going to change out onto the field, with that hail, Venusaur will be leaving us at the end of the turn. Regigigas revealing its Life Orb there as well. I do think we just saw the Sleep Powder, however, go straight down into Regigigas, and something that you said earlier, Lee, is that Sleep could be critical, and being able to get that nice and early on is great for Leonardo. And pair it up with a Swords Dance as well, when you're not going to be scared of a Wheezing and Regigigas is asleep. It's perfect for Groudon here.
Yeah, perfect turn here from Leonardo, approaching this in a way where he's saying, well, I can't really prevent what's happening right now, so let's try and get something out of this turn. I'm either going to get my sleep powder onto the Regigigas, or I'm going to be able to get my Swords Dance off. But by the wheezing protecting, because of the threat from the Groudon's Precipice Blades or Max Quake, of course, here, you know, it's give the opportunity to get the sleep powder off with the sash, obviously, on the Venusaur, and then the Swords Dance as well. So kind of like a double whammy for Leonardo, setting himself up perfectly going into this next turn. So the Regigigas is definitely going to stay asleep this next turn, and the Wheezing is going to be in a very awkward position because of the hail potentially chipping away at a potential sash that could be on that Pokemon.
Yeah, it does ground Alberto's strategy to a halt, really, because the Wheezing as well, you know, it's not carrying anything like a Focus Sash, and so it's going to be taken down, particularly by this Swords Dance Groudon. If it wants to go for anything like a Max Quake, it's just going to be removed from the field straight away, and Regigigas then will lose the neutralizing gas support that it needs to be able to not have that slow start ability, and it's still just obviously taking its turn of sleep here as Groudon does go for that Max Quake. So going to be targeting right down into that vulnerable Wheezing here, picking up the solid KO against it. So really great here for Groudon to be able to obviously boost up the defense as well, but just remove the neutralizing gas from play. It's exactly what the Groudon needs to be able to start steamrolling through Alberto's team.
Yeah, and it's going to get access to its drought ability now, so we'll see the sun come onto the field, get rid of the hail that's currently in play. And also the interesting thing is, knowing that Alberto does have access to a Pokemon like the Shadow Rider Calyrex, getting that special defense boost already that we've seen players kind of fall back on for Groudon to kind of give it a bit more longevity against something so threatening is really helpful. And you couldn't ask for a better partner really right now than what the Groudon's got in that Umbreon. That is going to be a great Pokemon to have in front of this Shadow Rider Calyrex.
Yeah, I was about to say, particularly when you see Calyrex Shadow Rider joining the field, having Umbreon there is fantastic. You can deal some good damage with the Snarls to start reducing that special attack and support the Groudon a little bit more. And Groudon as well, safe to keep going for those Max Quakes and boost up the special defense on Leonardo's side of the field. Yeah,
and it's a really awkward position now for Alberto. You know, the Regigigas obviously has that slow start ability, and actually it's not going to be able to really do the damage or be as fast as you kind of want it to. It's a bit of a sit and duck almost here for the Groudon to potentially just attack into it for free. Ooh. Wow, that is some big damage as it picks up the knockout and further boosts that special defense stat on the Groudon and the Umbreon.
Yeah, the Swords Dance really paying off there for the Groudon, able to deal so much damage to the opposing side of the field. And see Regigigas is now going to get back to its normal size and roll right back into its Pokeball here. And Alberto now already down 2 Pokemon early on in this game 1. The Umbreon is going to go for that Snarl, does huge damage as it finds its mark onto that opposing Calyrex. One more Snarl will be able to finish it off, and I think critically reducing the special attack there just means that Umbreon and Groudon can breathe a little easier. I mean, you already saw how little damage the Astral Barrage did. It's now going to be dealing even lessly.
Yeah, that's the problem. The Calyrex is normally one of those Pokemon we've seen throughout Players Cup 3 when it has made an appearance, how dominating it can be. But, you know, when you approach it like Leonardo has here, getting the special defense boosts up, utilizing things like Snarl, just really nullify its ability to actually function here. And it's going to be very difficult for Alberto to come back into this one, especially now with the -1 special attack on the Calyrex. And maybe Alberto's just using this time to really think about going into game 2, how he can readjust going into the next game to approach this matchup a little bit differently than he has done in this one. So we do see the Urshifu hit the field for him.
Yeah, and Urshifu's a good Pokemon to counter something like the Umbreon. It can go for something like a powerful close combat here and deal a huge chunk of damage, but the other risk you have with going for something like close combat is all your defenses do drop down as well. So even though Groudon is, you know, Sword Stance up as well, it's going to be dealing a big amount of damage. Urshifu will be leaving itself really vulnerable to anything, even potentially something that Umbreon can try and finish up with. It's going to be another Astral Barrage though, targeting down into Leonardo's side, and Urshifu is going to be able to go for that close combat directly into the Umbreon, able to hang on 9 HP though, so going to be able to survive such a big attack and can now threaten to try and get that KO against the Calyrex as well with potentially another Snarl. Groudon going to go for that Max Quake, going to be targeting straight down into the Calyrex, just removing it straight away from the field, leaving Umbreon free to be able to target down against this opposing Urshifu.
Yeah, and just removing the big kind of threat there in the Calyrex and leaving the Urshifu to just clean up now. You know, the Groudon, one of those Pokemon we've already seen its defensive capabilities, so going to be able to deal with the Urshifu pretty effectively. The Umbreon survival there is really nice, just being able to maybe break a potential Focus Sash that's on the Pokemon, making it a bit easier to kind of finish up this match for Leonardo. But masterfully done here, you know, by Leonardo, and a really awkward, you know, matchup here where you don't like seeing Pokemon like Regigigas and Weezing because it's so disruptive because of the neutralizing gas, but really taking advantage of the turns that he's had and making that really count in the rest of this match, and really difficult for Alberto to kind of get a hold on.
Yeah, and it was you see the game's just been wrapped up there by Leonardo. Nothing to comment on that last turn of the match. But I think the interesting thing is that Venusaur, you know, it didn't have its sun, didn't have the chlorophyll, but the fact that it was a Focus Sash Venusaur did allow that calculation of, right, I know that potentially the Max Hailstorm's going to come my way, I'm going to lose my Venusaur at the end of the turn, but if I'm going to sacrifice it, I need to make it worth it. And being able to connect that Sleep Powder was a complete game changer there for Leonardo, and it just allowed him to get the momentum back up on his side. You don't have to worry about the Regigigas while it's taking a nap. I can really focus down on that Weezing.
Yeah, and I think like that's something that Leonardo's maybe read into, thinking he's probably more likely going to go for the max Hailstorm here to because he knows about the Focus Sash. So in one turn I can go for the max Hailstorm, I can get rid of the Venusaur in one fell swoop. But Leonardo reading into that perfectly, and like you say, taking advantage of the turn where he's definitely going to be able to get the Sleep Powder off, and then the Swords Dance as well with the Groudon. And you think maybe would a max strike have been a better option there, and then utilizing something like your Weezing. But in that situation, you are leaving your Weezing a little bit vulnerable to what the Groudon does. If it does go for a Precipice Blades there, it does get a little bit tricky. But you could even double up into the Venusaur. That would prevent the sleep, and it then allows your Regigigas to kind of have a little bit more utility going forward in the games and be able to get at least some more attacks off, whereas the Sleep Powder just shut out the game straight away there. So yeah, very difficult for Alberto to kind of do anything after that point in the game.
Yeah, I think you're right. Alberto needs to kind of adjust if that lead wants to come out again from Leonardo, and you might want to try and double up into the Venusaur, but then you risk the fact that Groudon's going to be able to sit there and just go, hey, I'm going to set up another Swords Dance and be really powerful once again. So it's about, I guess, trying to figure out which threat you can deal with better towards the end of the game, and it could be running the risk of maybe trying to avoid Precipice Blades or trying to avoid the Sleep Powder. So it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to be able to combat the offensive strategies that Leonardo has got and the good kind of setup, whether it's putting Pokemon to sleep or boosting up your attack, that Leonardo has options with.
Yeah, and I think the lead from Leonardo is great in most situations in this matchup. You know, you either see the Weezing come in and you don't get your sun, but you've still got that threatening presence of Sleep Powder, Swords Dance, or you don't see the Weezing come in and you've got Chlorophyll and you've got you Groudon to kind of Swords Dance or just disrupt or switch out to Umbreon or whatever. So it's a really flexible lead from Leonardo to approach this sort of matchup and whatever aspect he sees from Alberto. And Alberto got everything to do in this match. Obviously, it's going to be hard to approach this one, especially with the Umbreon and bringing in your Calyrex to kind of, you know, really take advantage of the power from that side of the field. But if he's able to make use of the Weezing and the Regigigas in some sort of way that we didn't see in that first game, I think he's got a better chance of kind of tying this matchup to take it to a game 3.
Right, well, let's jump into the next game in this set and see exactly what adaptations are going to be made. I always do want to see the Regigigas and Weezing come out again, though, because it's such a great combination, and I'm delighted to see Alberto leading out with it here. I wonder what Mischief is going to be able to get up to in this game, particularly when it's facing down in a rematch against this Venusaur and Groudon from Leonardo.
Yeah, you would imagine Alberto's probably thinking, okay, well, I can adjust what I did game 1. I probably maybe shouldn't have protected my Weezing here, but then does that open the door for Leonardo to adjust his play and think, well, the Weezing's probably not going to protect here. Do I go for Precipice Blades this turn, or do I stick to what I was doing and go for that Swords Dance because I'm in such a phenomenal position going into the next turn, and maybe switch out the Venusaur here to preserve it for later in the game when I've got rid of the Venusaur, the Weezing here. But I mean, even the same play again from Leonardo forces the Weezing to kind of go for a certain play in Taunt if it's got it into that Venusaur to stop the Sleep Powder, and you have to go for that Max Strike as well to guarantee that the Weezing can move before the Venusaur.
That's the thing, the speeds are all very interesting here, because the Weezing, if it isn't able to get that Taunt off, will be able to utilize and outspeed the Pokemon on Leonardo's side. That Groudon can just go for the Precipice Blades and pick up a KO against it. We know that obviously it's not levitating and it doesn't have a Focus Sash. A Precipice Blades is really going to hurt into that Weezing slot. But no surprises here. Alberto going to be Dynamaxing up the Regigigas, going to make full use of its potential here, being able to suppress its slow start ability so that it's able to have that speed and attack attack that it wants to have, particularly when you pair it up with something like the Life Orb. It is amazing in Dynamax, but Leonardo going to be able to match that as well, Dynamaxing up the Groudon.
Yeah, not hanging about here, not wanting to go for the Sword Stance here. Maybe adjusting his play like we were talking about and going straight after that Weezing here, because once you do remove the Weezing from play, then, you know, the neutralizing gas isn't in effect, and that Regigigas becomes half as effective as it is right now.
And it's nice to preserve the Venusaur. If you're able to get the sun up for later, then it can take advantage of that. But Weezing just going to go straight away here for the Protect in the face of this Groudon. Regigigas moving first, does go for the Max Strike and targeting down into that Groudon. Does a big chunk of damage. A good job that that Groudon is Dynamaxed up with its HP stat doubled to be able to take that. But I think critically losing the speed there as well could put things in a little bit of a difficult situation, even if the Weezing is removed from the field. The Max Quake's going to come out, connect onto the Weezing. It's going to connect through Protect and do about third of damage here. So this is where things now get really interesting for the Weezing, because it's going to be, you know, very vulnerable this next turn, and if you switch it out, then you don't get to benefit from the neutralizing gas either.
Yeah, that's the problem here, you know. We don't know what item the Weezing's got at the minute, though, so it could be carrying something like a Sugar Berry as well, which would reduce the damage from the Groudon, and especially now that it hasn't had the Sword Stance kind of boost, it's probably going to be able to take a Max Quake, even with the damage that it's already taken. But you're right, Lou, you're in a precarious position where you don't really want to lose Weezing just yet, but you can see the damage that this Regigigas is doing to the Groudon as well, and the speed drops are useful. Of course, that is making things in life a bit easier for the Weezing here, especially if you've got something like Will-O-Wisp that you want to go into that Groudon with this next turn.
But Regigigas going to go for the Max Hailstorm, going to be dealing a huge chunk of damage to that opposing Groudon. Not going to be enough to pick up the KO, but setting up that weather as well. So you're going to get that residual chip damage from the hail starting to come into effect as well. Groudon, however, has got a little trick up its sleeve. Having access to its Citrus Berry can regain a little bit of HP. Not going to be too scared going forward as it goes for another Max Quake. And I think this is nice, boosting up the special defenses when you know that that Calyrex Shadow Rider potentially can be in the back, and particularly when you've got an Umbreon. If you can just boost that up with special defenses, it can then have access to obviously Snarl and can deal with that Calyrex Shadow Rider threat when it comes in later. Groudon, however, still has to deal with this particular Regigigas.
Yeah, and that's the problem. It's taken so much damage in the process of dealing with the Weezing here that it's going to be difficult to deal with the Regigigas. It's not taken too much damage so far, but you can see the utility here of that Umbreon really coming into play with that Yawn onto the Regigigas now, which is going to mean that Alberto has to either switch it out the next turn or let it go to sleep.
Yeah, Urshifu going to join here on the field as well, and it can apply some pressure to that Umbreon with, of course, that close combat that we saw earlier. The interesting thing to, of course, remember that the Groudon and the Umbreon have taken that speed drop as well, so Urshifu going to be able to outspeed here on the field, and it goes straight away for that close combat into the Umbreon. It is going to be able to survive. We did get to see that earlier, but maybe if this Regigigas, when it's able to move, is able to try and double up into it, it's going to be able to try and get the KO against it. Groudon, however, just sticking once again with these Max Quakes, boosting up now to +3 special defense and dealing a decent chunk to the Regigigas. This is, of course, the last turn of Dynamax for both of our players as well.
Yeah, and if the Umbreon can hang on here, it can maybe, I think what we saw was a Yawn into that Urshifu, but Alberto smartly targeting into that slot, knowing that it's the one thing that really disrupts the Shadow Rider Calyrex when it does come onto the field, and making that a priority here, knowing that the Groudon, even with the special defense boost that it's got, it's still very low health at this point, not really be as impactful in the rest of this match. But you look at what Leonardo's still got to come in against what Alberto's got on the field, you know. The Regigigas now asleep. The Urshifu is going to be a little bit in an awkward spot if the Venusaur comes in, because the Venusaur going to have access to this Chlorophyll ability now, and then the Incineroar with its Intimidate support as well is going to be a phenomenal support for Leonardo going into the rest of this game.
Yeah, that's the thing. Decisions. Do you want to use your Venusaur to, you know, utilize the sun on the field and be really speedy, or do you want that Intimidate being thrown down against the opposing Urshifu? And also, of course, having that Fake Out. We know that the Urshifu is carrying the Focus Sash, so being able to kind of get rid of that problem early on with something like a Fake Out could be really, really nice. But again, Urshifu's got to worry about those close combats because they're still going to hurt.
Yeah, that's a big thing. You know, the close combat, it is -1, but they're not something you can just ignore. They will be doing big, significant damage. And, you know, the Wicked Blow as well, if Urshifu decides to go for that onto the Groudon, then, you know, it's not really going to mind about the Intimidate, because it kind of negates that with the critical hit that move always kind of carries. So you're in a position where you can get possibly rid of the Groudon here if you are Alberto, and don't really mind about the Regigigas on the field.
Just going straight up for the Protect here, knowing that a Fake Out could be coming into that slot. And I believe that was exactly what we saw there. Regigigas still going to be taking a little bit of a nap and going through another sleep turn here as Groudon goes for the Precipice Blades. I believe that was, yes, and going to be able to find its mark onto the sleeping Regigigas here. And although Alberto does lose a Pokemon, Regigigas really wasn't doing a lot for him at this stage. You know, it's asleep, it's got slow start. It's kind of not the best Pokemon to have on the battlefield at the moment. So having the option to bring in that Calyrex from the back could be a good strategy for him here, but the problem is you're facing down against an Incineroar. That's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, but you do have the Urshifu that kind of helps with that matchup. In all honesty, you know, it has to protect this turn. And the one thing about Urshifu is it does have really good defense stats, so it will be able to take attacks from the Groudon pretty well. But do you risk a turn where you maybe protect your Calyrex to get rid of the Groudon and then allow maybe the Venusaur to come in, or do you target down into the Incineroar, knowing that once I get rid of the Incineroar, then Calyrex is going to have a way easier time, knowing that Pokemon has left the field. But like you've already mentioned in previous turns where you use close combat, you are reducing your defense capabilities if you are Urshifu, so it is risky. And especially as Incineroar does have the sun kind of boosting it here, and will be able to do some big damage in return to the Urshifu and probably survive a close combat at this point with the Intimidate when you factor that in.
Well, the clock ticking down there as Calyrex goes for the Astral Barrage. Going to be able to connect on both these Pokemon, and we'll try and get a KO on Groudon, but all of those special defense boosts really paying off there for the Groudon, able to survive. Incineroar also able to survive the double up there from the close combat, and this is where now Urshifu is sitting very, very vulnerable as well. Incineroar is going to go for the Darkest Lariat, going to be able to target down into that opposing Urshifu to critically, I think, break the focus sash here. That's exactly what Leonardo needs, so that if Groudon's able to find its mark, but it's not. It was going to try and get the KO against it. Instead, Calyrex is going to be the only one taking damage from Groudon. But I mean, look at those special defense boosts paying off, Lee.
Yeah, that's a huge survival there. Just unfortunate that, you know, Leonardo wasn't really able to capitalize a bit more there with the Precipice Blades, especially onto the Urshifu. But unfortunate that it did miss, but that's one of the drawbacks with this double target attack.
Yeah, another Astral Barrage is going to be able to come off, though, and find its mark. And this time, get the double KO thanks to the low HP of both of Leonardo's Pokemon here. And now Leonardo's in a situation where there's only the Venusaur hanging out in the back.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Chlorophyll, you know, ability will still be intact. So it will be faster than everything on Alberto's side of the field. But the problem with Venusaur is, the sun actually ends here, so that Chlorophyll ability will not be intact. And that kind of wraps up the game, because it's going to be very difficult. One of the things I was going to say is, even if it was intact, you know, you've only got access to single target attacks here, and you're facing down against two very powerful Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, things could have been very different here if that Precipice Blades had maybe connected onto that opposing Urshifu. I believe it was at -2 defense thanks to the 2 close combats. So it could possibly have picked up the KO against it. I know it has good defenses, but certainly being at -2 doesn't sit you in good stead. And then bringing in your Venusaur, even if the Calyrex obviously was able to get the double KO, Venusaur we know has got the Focus Sash, so there could potentially have been some utility of maybe trying to put it to sleep or something like that to try and get the Venusaur out of the game. But certainly, like you said there, Lee, it's so difficult when you're just a Venusaur, there's no more sun in the sky, and you're down against 2 very strong Pokemon.
Yeah, you probably needed about 3 or 4 turns of sun remaining on the field for Venusaur to have a chance at closing that one out. Potentially it could have done, but unfortunately for Leonardo, not going to be the case there. But what an adjustment there by Alberto, you know, really utilizing, not falling for any kind of, you know, taking any risks there. Thinking that first turn, well, I shouldn't have probably made the play that I did, because obviously turn 1 it really cost me with the Protect on the Weezing. But, you know, playing the mind games perfectly there, going for the exact same play again almost, and really protecting the Weezing, getting some big damage onto the Groudon, which proved invaluable in the end game. And, you know, as soon as the Venusaur wasn't an issue on the field with that sleep powder, then it was a lot easier to kind of manage the threats like Umbreon that came on the field, which you really targeted down quite quickly.
Yeah, I like going for the max strike as well on the Regigigas, just being able to reduce the speed on that Groudon that obviously stayed intact throughout the whole of that game too, but also being able to actually deal out that big chunk of damage, particularly when it was followed up with that max Hailstorm, did put Groudon in that dangerous position. I think if it hadn't have been able to get up those, obviously the special defense boost from all the max Quakes, then the Calyrex would have been able to deal with the Groudon a little bit earlier on, but it was just great for Leonardo to kind of have that foresight in mind, knowing that it was going to be a threat and needed to prepare for it. But Urshifu was definitely troublesome too with those close combats.
Yeah, definitely. You know, that's one Pokemon that you can't really afford to leave your Umbreon in against, because it's doing so much damage, it's so threatening, and you've not really got the attacks on your Umbreon to deal with the Urshifu in return, or really kind of punish going one or toe-to-toe with it, you know. So it does make it difficult. I think if you are Leonardo, you kind of need to preserve that Umbreon for maybe later in the game, readjust maybe what you're bringing to have something that deals with the Urshifu a little bit better than what you've got, because the Groudon's great, especially when it gets a special defense boost up, like we saw, able to take the Astral Barrage phenomenally. But the problem is it doesn't have the damage output, and I know it did miss the Precipice Blades, but even at that point you're probably looking at being very close to a knockout, or the Urshifu still surviving there. So you need something that's going to be a little bit better to maybe deal with a Pokemon like that, and it'd be interesting to see if Leonardo does switch things up maybe in that regard to have something that kind of better suits the Urshifu matchup.
Well, let's find out. Let's jump into Game 3 and see exactly who's going to be victorious in this winners semi-final match. We're going to be jumping into Game 3, and once again, Weezing and Regigigas, that classic combination, jumping out there for Alberto, and Leonardo sticking with the same thing as well. We've got Venusaur and Groudon on the field once again.
Yeah, same leads as we've had before, and you know, this is where the real mind games go. Do you go for the Sleep Powder now? Do you go for the Max Strike if you're Alberto to potentially try and get a taunt off into the potential Venusaur? There's a lot of mind games going on, and do you just protect your Weezing as before? Does Leonardo revert back to what he did in Game 1? It really worked out for him, didn't it?
Yeah, so many different options, and like you said, Lee, the mind games are going to be real coming into this Game 3, what strategy our opponents are going to go for here. But I see a Dynamax Regigigas, and I think this is always the great strategy to go for with this core, because you just want to utilize it as quickly and as effectively as you can, while Weezing is still going to be able to be on the battlefield. However, once again, Leonardo going to be able to utilize the Dynamax of his very own as well, so we're not going to be seeing anything too unsurprising here. It's going to be the Dynamax Groudon once again. So not going to be the Venusaur, no swords dancing from the Groudon, but just being able to apply that offensive pressure once again with those max Quakes, dealing so much damage and really threatening against that Weezing on the opposing side of the field. Weezing, however, is once again going to be protecting, so if it is a max Quake in its direction, we know that it's going to be able to survive, but this again leaves the Regigigas so vulnerable to taking a potential sleep here from the Sleep Powder. The Max Hailstorm actually targeting down into that Groudon, doing the super effective damage straight away. I think Alberto, knowing that Groudon gave him so much trouble previously, it's just good to try and move that Pokemon. But Venusaur is then super free to go for that Sleep Powder and put that Regigigas to sleep once again.
Yeah, you know, the Leonardo not making the mistake like he did in Game 2 and switching the Venusaur out, keeping it on the field, utilizing it and using it for the reason why it's there, to get a Sleep Powder off into this Regigigas that worked out so well in that Game 1. And now you can see the Regigigas is really going to struggle again in this game, and as well as the Weezing, because now you haven't got the Max Strike, the speed stats haven't changed at all over the board, and the Weezing now in a really precarious position where it's really threatened by a Max Quake from this Groudon going into the next turn, and Leonardo pretty much free to do what he wants. This, you know, go for another Max Quake, keep Venusaur on the field, or maybe even switch it out, because you've got that guaranteed sleep turn from the Regigigas here. And do you, if you are Alberto, do you switch out the Weezing and maybe try and preserve it for later on in this game to continually disrupt and try and disrupt these abilities on Leonardo's side?
Oh, the Weezing trying to get the double protect there, but unfortunately has failed. So Venusaur is free to just target it down with an Earth Power. Not going to be able to pick up the KO against it though, and will be able to activate its Aguave Berry, so it's going to be able to regain some HP here. But if there is another Max move coming out from the Groudon into their slot, I think it's going to be in vain. It's going to be the Max Quake and targeting right down. So just in case, as we saw, that the Earth Power wasn't going to be enough to pick up the KO, the Max Quake is going to be able to finish the job. But I really like that play because it guarantees that you get rid of the Weezing, and hey, if the Venusaur was able to get the KO against it, the Max Quake just redirects into the Regigigas and still deals really decent damage.
Yeah, like you say, a really nice way to get the most out of your moves there, and especially if the Weezing did switch out in that situation, you're getting all the damage necessary onto whatever switches in, which is potentially Urshifu or the Shadow Rider Calyrex. But yeah, if you do knock out the Weezing in that scenario, you get some nice damage onto the Regigigas. And now the Regigigas has spent its 1 turn sleeping, so it can potentially wake up this next turn, but without the neutralizing gas, it is nowhere near as effective with that slow start ability as it would be without it. And the Calyrex coming in obviously does threaten the Groudon and the Venusaur with potentially Ghost and Psychic type attacks, but with the special defense boosts that the Groudon's already got under its belt, as well as the Venusaur, you know, and now the Sun in effect, the Calyrex is in an awkward position where it is susceptible to Sleep Powder, so you may see Alberto potentially try and protect it this turn.
Yeah, well, Venusaur's going to actually jump in on out of there, getting out of the way of the Sun and bringing Incineroar to the field. And I do really like this play. We've seen how Incineroar is such a great counter to this Calyrex because it's not going to have taken that big damage from the Astral Barrage. It could obviously apply a lot of pressure with the Darkest Lariats as well. The Calyrex is also just going to protect him. I think, like you said there, Lee, wouldn't be surprised to see it protect. And that's exactly what we've seen happen here, as Groudon is free to just go for another Max Quake. Let's get that special defense boosted up on Leonardo's side of the field even more and dealing a decent chunk to that opposing Calyrex.
Yeah, that's the thing, and you know, just getting a little bit of damage onto it now, kind of setting it up for the knockout later in this game. And like you say, the switch into Incineroar here, really nice, getting the Intimidate onto the Regigigas and giving you an option where you've got something that can resist most things that the Shadow Rider Calyrex can throw out at you. Now, the Groudon in a great spot where it's got those 3 special defense boosts, not going to worry about what the Calyrex is really throwing out at this point, and still got that Citrus Berry intact. So Leonardo managing this game a lot better than he did in game 2, making it very difficult for Alberto to kind of get a handle on.
Yeah, Leonardo's been really good at being able to work around the threat of having that Weezing and Regigigas really disrupting his plans in terms of having that weather as well with the Groudon, but it's actually been able to work around it so well. You didn't need the speed necessarily, because if you're able to remove the Weezing from play, then Regigigas gets slow again. If you're able to put things to sleep, they can't even move regardless of what speed tier they are on. Urshifu, however, is going to join the field here. It's going to be able to get in unintimidated in this situation, as Groudon finds its mark though with the Precipice Blades, connecting on both the opposing Pokemon, takes Urshifu to below 50%, as well as the Regigigas, leaving the Incineroar free to go for this Max Flare in the Sun and pick up the KO against Urshifu. We were saying before game 3, Lee, that Leonardo needed a way to deal with that Urshifu, and I think he's done it.
Yeah, he's found the formula for getting rid of it and making quick work of it here, and Alberto getting very punished for the switch in there, trying to preserve his Calyrex for later in this game, and unfortunately the Regigigas stays asleep for another turn, as we've only got that and the Shadow Rider Calyrex left on the field for Alberto.
I mean, yes, the Shadow Rider Calyrex is really great offensively, but Groudon has all these boosts and it's got a lot more HP than it did previously. So we know that unless there's going to be some kind of critical hit coming in here to deal more damage, it's going to be able to take these really nicely. And as long as those Precipice Blades do keep finding their mark, there's not really a lot that Calyrex can do here, particularly when that Incineroar is free to just follow up with, you know, any kind of damage at this stage. The Flare Blitzers as well in the Sun, being able to utilize that weather. The Regigigas, however, wakes up and protects, as does the Calyrex, so going to be no damage being dealt out on this side of the field. Maybe just trying to stall out the Sun turns by another turn.
Yeah, and you know, that gives you a little bit of a, if you can remove the Groudon and the Incineroar, then it makes life a little bit easier to deal with the Venusaur that you know is in the back for Leonardo. So trying to just do whatever he can at this point to kind of claw this match back. But Leonardo, like you've already mentioned, the special defense boosts probably put the Groudon out of reach from the Calyrex to be able to knock it out. Got to worry about the Ice Punch, but you know, the Regigigas not really that impactful like it would be without that slow start ability.
Yeah, that's very true. You do have to watch out for it, but as long as you're able to move first, you can always try and get the KO, and that's exactly what Groudon's doing to the Regigigas here, going for that Precipice Blades, but not actually being able to find its mark on either Pokemon. Incineroar going to go for that Flare Blitz, though, and pick up the KO against the Regigigas, so that Groudon can breathe a sigh of relief in the face of that potential Ice Punch.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, the more turns that do tick over with that Regigigas on the field is when that slow start ability activated, the closer it is for that ability kind of be nullified and the Regigigas to gain back that speed and the power and then become a little bit more of a force again. So it's a smart play here for Leonardo to kind of remove it while he's got the chance to. And then, you know, the Precipice Blades damage alone just doing far too much to the Calyrex to make it that impactful, as we see another Astral Barrage is finally able to pick up the Groudon Lou, but the Incineroar going to be left on the field and able to clean this one up and take Leonardo into the next stage of this tournament.
Yeah, Incineroar is just going to be able to go for this Darkest Lariat, connect down onto the opposing Calyrex and pick up the KO, meaning Leonardo is the winner of this particular winner's semi-final. So phenomenal play from both of our players here, and I think it's one of those things, when you see something like Regigigas and Weezing, you get a little bit of excited. It's a little bit more unusual, but you know exactly